Hi guys, welcome to the guide. In this episode, we're going to be going over one of my top 10 favorite planes, the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. It was the plane that made the now famous shark smile famous. This was the plane that got the shark teeth on the map. It wasn't the first to do it. I think it was some German Bf-109s in Europe were the first to stick a smiling shark face on the front of their plane. But the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk was the one that made it famous. Through the exploits of the Flying Tigers in China. They were an American mercenary group, as they were known then, American volunteer group that kind of volunteered to go help the Chinese government out before America was officially involved in the war, because the United States government couldn't officially send over a squadron to help the Chinese government out, but through a backdoor kind of way, that's what they ended up doing. And the Flying Tigers used the P-40 to great success against the Japanese Air Force in China, proving that it was a pretty good fighter at the beginning of the war. At the beginning of the war, the P-40 could hold its own against the best that the other two guys could throw at it. But by the mid of the war, it was showing its age and was relegated to a ground attack role, which it proved good at because it was rugged and could take some hits. It was fast enough and had a decent bomb load to make it pretty good at that role, and that's where it stayed for the rest of the role, is as a ground attacker. Alright, so let's get to the boring specs. The P-40C, the third edition in production, had a wingspan of 37 feet and a length of 31 feet, a top speed of 367 miles per hour at 12,000 feet. It was powered by an Allison V12 liquid-cooled engine that produced 1,150 horsepower, which is where it gets its distinct chin, and why the smiling shark tooth grin on it just works so well, because the radiator is actually is the chin of the plane. That's why the plane has that chin, is that's the radiator. It had a range of 850 miles, and the C model and above were equipped with 6 50 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing, and could carry a bomb load of up to 700 pounds. The A and the B models only had 4 50 caliber machine guns. So, but once, 50 caliber machine guns became the mainstay of American fighters up to the Korean War, passed into the Korean War. So that's quite a bit of firepower to be packing on an airplane. Even nowadays, that's quite a bit of firepower. Alright, so that's the boring stuff out of the way. A total of 13,738 were produced, making it the third most produced American plane of the war, behind the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt and the North American P-51 Mustang. Its first flight was on October 14th, 1938, and it went into production the next year in 1939. It didn't test very long because it already had a proven airframe, which it borrowed from its predecessor, the P-36 Hawk, hence Warhawk. Stupid pun, but it worked. And the main difference between the P-36 and the P-40 was the engines. The P-36 was powered by a radial engine that couldn't produce the same amount of power as the Warhawk's liquid-cooled inline V6 or V12 engine. And the added bonus of the inline V12 engines is they were more streamlined and created less drag than their radial counterparts. They weren't quite as rugged and they couldn't take a hit. Like radial engines, you could blow cylinders out of radial engines and they'll keep chugging along. Liquid-cooled engines, they're a bit more finicky and can't quite take quite as much damage. Alright. I guess that's enough of just random gibberish, but you know, that's half of what I do. The last P-40 was retired from the Brazil Air Force in 1958. So it stayed in many other countries' arsenal for quite some time after the war. Its service, it served with pretty much every allied country. From the US, Britain, Soviet Union. Pretty much if you were the ally of the United States, at some point in time, you got a boatload of P-40s on your shore. They were made most famous, obviously, by the Flying Tigers, which used them to great effects against the Japanese and China. That's where they learned the tactics that best were used with the P-40, and that was mainly start up above the enemy, dive down, take some shots at him, and then just sweep away and don't try to turn with them. Because the P-40 it was not a great turning airplane. It could dive fast, and it had quite a bit. It had some machine guns on it, and it could take some hits, but it couldn't turn with a Zero, and it couldn't really turn with a BF-109. So it was best to just swoop down, take some shots, and then get away. But that being said, it was limited to below 15,000 feet for operations because it did not come with a two-stage supercharger. So above 15,000 feet, it could go above there. It just sucked above there. But below it, it could hang with a BF-109 Messerschmitt, which was Germany's premier fighter. Like, up until early to mid 1942, the P-40 Warhawk could hold its own up against the best that Japan could throw at it and the best that Germany could throw at it in the realm of like air superiority type fighter planes. After that is when Germany and Japan's fighter planes started to surpass it, and it could no longer keep up with it. But for the first 2 years of the war, it did the job that was asked for it to do very respectably. I mean, it was the only American-made plane for the first 2 years of the war that even had a chance to keep up with its counterparts on the other side. Like, it was the only plane that could keep up with a Zero. It couldn't turn with a Zero, but using the tactics of swooping down, diving, taking some pop shots, and then climbing up and out of the way, it was very effective against the Zero. And same could be said against the BF-109. It couldn't turn with a BF-109, but if it used the proper tactics, it could hold its own against it. It was just, pilots have the tendency, me included, and I found this out with this game, is when you go into an engagement, you just want to turn. You don't want to swoop and then climb back up out of the way. You want to get in there and then stay with them. And that's not the right tactic to be using with this plane. So, and also, that being said, this plane's always getting compared to like the greatest planes of the war. Like, its replacement as an air superiority fighter was the P-51 Mustang, and you can't compare nothing can compare to the P-51 Mustang. In the European theater, like, that was one of the greatest planes ever made. It's in like, it's like one or two greatest planes ever made, if not the greatest plane ever made. Like, when you're getting compared to something like that, of course you're gonna look like crap. That's like comparing Mike Tyson to Muhammad Ali. I mean, you can't compare. I mean, yes, Mike Tyson was a good fighter for his day. Kind of slow, kind of stupid. Did some things he shouldn't have, but he was a good fighter. But when you compare him to like Muhammad Ali, there's no comparison. It's just it's like a good fighter versus the greatest fighter of all times. Like, you can't compare it to that. and it's almost just flattering that it gets stuck into that comparison. So I think that's the comparison I'm choosing to use to like kind of show why the P-40 doesn't get the respect that I personally believe it deserves. Because it did what it was asked for it, and it did it with, you know, a decent amount of success for the first 2 years of the war. There was no other American-made fighter that could do what the P-40 did for the first 2 years of the war, and especially with how many were in the first 2 years. It was the only fighter that had a reasonable enough amount of numbers produced of it in the first year of the war. So yeah, that's my ramble about the P-40 Warhawk. I hope you liked it. I gotta be ending this video because I'm trying to avoid making it too long. Yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you found some entertainment in that ramble.